What's up, everyone? Jordan here, and I have a little bit of a surprise for everyone. I don't think anybody was expecting me to show up with the director of Dogubomb, Tonda Ros, whose game Blueprints I have secretly been playtesting for a number of years, and will be coming out April 10th of this year in just a few weeks. Tonda, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm sure you've never had to tell anybody this, but what is Blueprints?
Blueprints is an atmospheric architectural adventure. Sometimes we say it's a mystery strategy adventure. Sometimes we say it's a first-person puzzle game. It's hard to define it in any one thing, so that it makes elevator pitches extremely difficult and not very accurate.
How long have you been working on this game?
I've been working on this game 8 years, so a long time.
And now that the game is imminent, Tonda's been gracious to sit with me to kind of talk about one of the more exciting games I've ever played. Those are my words, not his. And of course, I've seen most of the game. I've played through a lot of, I guess, a near final build. So my questions are going to be, in some ways, more for the viewer. Of course, I know more than I can speak about, but I'm really excited to talk about it, and hopefully just to get people more excited to play Blueprints. Let's dive in. I apologize, but I would like to read a summary from the Xbox Wire. Of course, this game will also be releasing on Xbox and PlayStation. Embark on a genre-defying experience in an ever-changing house. Draft rooms, unravel mysteries, solve puzzles, and develop architectural strategies as you try to track down the mysterious Room 46. The game's special blend of strategy, puzzle, mystery, and repeatability wrapped into the fabric of Mount Holly's atmospheric and aesthetically eclectic rooms creates a wholly unique experience that will leave you pondering what lies ahead. Your reaction?
Sounds good. That's quite good. That's quite evocative, and I think that's certainly better than me fumbling around which genres it's not and which genres it is, because genres are a little restrictive, and certainly when I was making the game, I did not try to put it into any one box.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to put it in three.
Cool. Three is acceptable.
So
3 is acceptable.
Let's try this. Box 1, Pillar 1, I'll say is a Myst puzzle-like experience, right? So we're talking first person, some kind of bespoke puzzle design that you can only really solve once, and then you know the answer. Non-linear narrative. That's a piece. Piece 2. And I know you'll never use this word, but like a roguelite. So this concept of a run that resets at the end of some condition, and every run is different. It's kind of procedurally generated in a way. There's a feeling of newness every time you attempt a run, and when you finish a run, you get that feeling of, okay, I'll just do just one more, and then that kind of never ends. And then the third box, I'll say, is board game mechanics. So strategy, currencies, resources, interlocking systems, a slower pace. So kind of move at your own pace. And then that concept of a card pool, drafting, and keeping track of like what's in it, what you've played, what you might be looking for. Is there anything we haven't covered that might describe Blueprints?
No, I think that's pretty perfect. I mean, I would say that there are elements of a mystery. I wouldn't use the word detective game, because detective games typically have a couple tropes that come along with them, but there are elements of figuring out, a narrative slowly through environmental storytelling.
I will say, like, from the top, that's a lot to combine into one game. And I know you mentioned that you weren't trying to put it in specific boxes, but what made you want to pursue such a genre-busting cross-combination type experience?
I think when you're explaining it, it sounds like a lot. Like, it really does sound like a lot, and I think that it doesn't come across as a lot when you're playing it, because it is actually quite simple to play. You're pretty much, you approach a door, you click on a door, and you make a choice, and that's pretty much what the game was at its inception. So, at its inception, it was what Blueprints is. It didn't evolve into that. So I think that the number of boxes it takes to describe is just a failing of words in a way, but not a necessarily indication of the complication of the game. So when I was kind of designing it, I just knew what Blueprints was, but I didn't know how to convey that to other people.
So I mentioned Myst, and it's clearly influenced you in some ways. What are, just off the top of your head, some major inspirations that we can dig into in a little bit?
Yeah. So I would say most of them are inactive inspirations. And I think this is a line of like when I'm inspired by all these things because they've informed who I am as a person. They've informed my taste in games, and they've informed sort of my taste in puzzles, certainly. But it was not like I was trying to create something along any of these lines. And I find as a player, one of the things that bugs me the most is derivative material. So I'm more likely to not do something if I've seen it before than I am to do something. So having said that, growing up, my childhood room was full of posters of Myst, Riven. I had a map of Dunny on one wall. So it's very clear that, that was my favorite game growing up. And so there's going to be a lot of that. But, I also grew to love board games and card games, like Magic the Gathering and King of Tokyo and Agricola, and like just so many, sort of Euro games. Sort of, I kind of eventually felt that the design space in those games was pretty much superior to what was going on in video games. So, whenever my design access is always sort of from that, which is much more simple, not like a million stats and not a million things on screen. Sort of simple designs that you could almost recreate in a physical game.
But there is a lot at play here, right? There's that roguelite per day loop, right, of a run, and what are you trying to do? What are you trying to succeed at? How long are you going to take? There's that per room loop, drafting the next room or exploring the room you're in. There's the management and strategy of drafting and kind of how you explore the systems that are in there. There's resources to collect. There's items to get. There's puzzles that are small and self-contained in rooms. There's puzzles that span the entire game. There's story, hidden systems and interactions. I think it's safe to say there's a lot to dig into here. So I want to try a little bit. I know we can't talk about specifics, and I would never betray the experience of the game. But just to be clear, this is kind of the point the whole time. Like, this is the vision, was that there were gonna be these different systems and loops that all kind of interacted to, combine into an experience.
The year one, there was a build complete, and the game has not changed. In fact, one of the reasons I went all in on the project was because I was like, okay, this is really fun, really simple, and like, it's not something I've ever seen before. And really not something I've ever seen before 8 years ago.
I'll echo that sentiment. Even in 2022, it was both something really fresh, really unexpected for me, but also felt like you were going to release it 5 days after I playtested it, because it just felt done. And it's been an excruciating few years to not be able to talk about it. Okay, let's dive in piece by piece, and we can dwell on it as long as you want, but I know we can't get into a ton of it. The premise. So give me a reminder. Where does the story, kind of what role does the story take place at the outset of the game?
So you play as Simon P. Jones, who is a 14-year-old kid who has just inherited a large estate left to him by his late great uncle. And his great uncle laid out the stipulations of the inheritance in his will. And there's a few conditionals in the will that say that Simon only inherits the estate if he can find the 46th room of the 45-room estate. And so there is a challenge at the onset, and the player must explore and try to track down this missing room. Because if you look at the estate's blueprint, there are only 45 rooms on the estate. That is literally how many rooms can fit on the estate. And so the entire game is about finding room 46.
That is a compelling charge to start with. How important does the story maintain throughout the experience? Like, what if you were ranking all? We mentioned a lot of different systems interactions. How important a component is the story to the game?
The story is really important to me. I don't think it's very important to players' level of enjoyment. Like, where I think that there are types of players, like let's say like someone who's more gameplay focused, more strategy focused, and they're just not going to necessarily read or absorb everything they find. And I think that's fine. And I think that it's capable of enjoying a lot of the game's atmosphere and mystery, maybe even more mystery, obviously, if you're not even figuring out what's going on. So I think it's certainly an experience that can be enjoyed without absorbing the story. But the story is very important if you're interested in actually figuring out things beyond the main objective of finding room 46. You don't need to necessarily understand the story to find room 46, but it will certainly add a lot to the experience.
Let's talk about the loop that most people, I think, refer to when they think of it as a roguelite. The loop or the run we call the day, right, in the game. When you start each day, you're essentially starting fresh. No resources, no items carry over. You have 50 steps. I think it's 50.
Yeah.
Which really denotes not the number of steps you take, but the number of moves you can make from room to room.
And I think that's really important because I think a lot of people, when they hear the concept or when they first hear about having 50 steps per day, I can tell, especially a lot of sort of slower paced puzzle players can think like, oh, I don't want this stressful, situation where every single step I take matters. Is that these are not actual literal steps you can take. You can take a lot more steps, and the game is not an action-based time system. You have no time pressure per day. It's a lot more leisurely. I'm really slow-paced as a person, and I think that you already mentioned the game is very slow-paced as well.
If you want, right? I think I've seen a few players play breakneck, so it's malleable, I think, to your play style.
True.
Yeah. So when you run out of steps, that's kind of your limiter for the run, right? The day is over, and
yes.
you kind of cycle to the next day. You get a little bit of a summary at the end, and that's the day. That's what, to me, cements it as a roguelite, or the way people want to describe it. But I have a sense of, having talked to you, that that's not the approach you took. You did not think of like, we are designing this as a roguelite. How did you arrive at that cycle system?
A lot of it's very easy to see now when roguelikes are so popular and so popularized, that it's easy to see the shared elements. But obviously 8 years ago, that was not the case. We did not have any of the deck builders hit. And so I think that one of my primary board game inspirations were those deck building, games like Dominion and Ascension, and drafting systems like you would find in Sushi Go or Agricola. And so I think like a lot of these elements that people associate with roguelikes are actually from, these games that were kind of more like run-based. I mean, it's just like a gaming session, right? Like you're just going to play, a game of Ascension. And so you're going to sort of get these elements, and then it resets the next day. So when I created the original game, it was like, you could just do this over and over again. That'd be more like arcade style, like run-based, right? Which is like starting in a day. So I think the progressive nature came from the story, first off, because, I could have a sort of superficial drafting rooms in a house game that you could play as many times as you wanted till you beat it, and that might be like a fun challenge. But it wasn't, the type of games I love. It's like I don't love Myst because of the puzzles. We'll say, like I love Myst because of the entire experience, the atmosphere, the story, and everything else. So I think that my ambitions for my first game at least were a lot more than just this cool run-based gameplay. And so the idea that I wanted to expand that to multiple days to tell a story seemed like a cool way to be able to play this gameplay system multiple times. And I think it was until like the first room that I created that kind of played with the idea of what can happen on one day to the next. And that's when things started to feel like I can progress this story and the player's progression in some clever ways. And most of those systems we came up on our own. I think likely legacy board games from like the legacy system, like Pandemic Legacy and things. I believe some of those, they certainly weren't super popular 8 years ago, but I had played at least like the Netrunner one at some point in early development. And so some of those things might have informed some of those ideas. Similarly, in terms of the inspirations, I tend to avoid games that I feel are close to mine because I don't want to necessarily. It's both two ways. I don't want to limit myself, right? Because if I'm a type of person who's not going to do something because I've seen it, I'd rather leave myself open and not restrict myself. The more games I play, the actual less options I have, because I'm like, that's been done before. So I'm more of a negative space in terms of my influences, where I purposely don't want to play something because I don't mind if it's been done before, but I do mind if I know it's been done before.
Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit. So we've talked about the day iteration. Let's talk about the room and really the drafting mechanic. So the house, as you've mentioned, is like a 9x5 grid, but the starting room and the destination room, so to speak, are already claimed. And then you as the player have to sort of move to an exit of a room and draft the next room. When you do that, you get 3 choices out of the pool. And if you don't get an ideal option from that, tough luck. You are sort of bound by fate at that point to build the house as you can with the options that are presented for you. Oftentimes, I can speak from experience, you will not get what you are looking for, and you will constantly have to adjust your strategy based on sort of the reality of that moment. And that happens many, many times throughout each run. So I'm just speaking for myself when I say this is surprisingly compelling. And I think you've hinted at that as well, that like even in a prototype stage, you were like, okay, I can full commit to this experience.
Yeah, we knew really, really early on. I think I had 3 people do full playthroughs because this wasn't just a slice that was created 8 years ago. This was the full game. It went a lot less deep, we'll say. Not saying anything more than that, but it was, finding room 46 was the goal. And the way you found room 46 was very, very similar to how you are able to find it in the real game. So it was pretty much a full look at the game, and I watched 3 people play through the game, and I knew like this is it. Like this is it. And I thought it was going to take 6 more months to finish.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about the length in a little bit. So this pool, it basically contains like all the available rooms in the game that can be drawn. Does it work like a deck builder? Like if I'm on, say, space A in the house and I draft room A, and I move to another side of the house, is A no longer available? Is it that kind of mind?
Yeah,
space?
you could. I think if you pictured the rooms in the house as cards in a deck, then each room is exactly in the deck once.
So this is me editorializing a little bit. I want your reaction on this. You're walking this really fine line of like, there's this grounded story that happened in this place, right? and this magical realism concept of a house that's literally rearranging the rooms, right? How did you make that work? Or do you feel like you have enough trust in the player to say, hey, you get what we're doing here and like roll with it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like, how do you ground something so mechanically heavy so that people still believe this world? I feel like this is the same thing in a film, right? Like the director's intention really comes through, and whether they believe this or not, or whether they, and I just fully believe this world, like, and the way things work. And I think there's an earnestness in the way the mechanics are presented as grounded reality. And I feel like not too many people question it after the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm definitely the kind of person that can just roll with that kind of thing. I just wondered if you thought too much about that. So there is one element of the game that I feel like diverges quite a lot from the roguelite genre, so to speak, which is, most roguelikes, when you die, the run resets. In Blueprints, you sort of push the day as far as you can, but then typically your run is over through circumstances outside of your control, but you've got time left and you've got this half finished thing that you can still walk back through and explore. Was that sort of a consequence of the way the systems you wanted to put in place, fell, or was that really intentional?
No, I mean, it was a consequence of the way systems fell. I don't think it was intentional, but it was certainly cool that it allowed, like you were saying, that there's different speeds at which players can play. It's cool that it allows people to really focus on the strategy, focus on, sort of just the pure puzzle of the house itself, because the house itself is the primary puzzle of the game. The way the rooms fit together, the way that your drafting decisions are impacting your available routes, the items that you have that you're trying to manage. So you can focus entirely on that. And then sort of at the end of the day, when your run ends, then you are able to, if you kind of were glossing over everything else, then you're able to kind of re-explore the space that you've created. Now, that's only one way to play. I think another totally valid way to play is explore very slowly each room as you go through it. And then maybe at the end of the day, you won't need to go back and re-explore. But I can tell you, after watching a lot of people play, it is always beneficial to kind of go back and check things that you might have missed and things that might have changed, and try things, because the room configuration that you have that day might not ever happen again. And maybe there are some things that you can do on that day because of that configuration.
Each of these rooms is beautiful, has unique card art, has unique effects, and you definitely come to learn them as you play, I think, right? As like building blocks of your run. A lot of variety, and a lot of potential interactions, right? How difficult has it been to have that much content in the game and make sure that any potential build will work and be appropriately balanced?
Yeah, that's where most of the time went into. For 40 years, balance was the primary concern, was because you want all these decisions to be interesting, and you want to have different days feel very different from one another. I wasn't looking so much to have the days be drastically crazy different all the time, but I wanted the opportunity for days to go in very unique ways, where you might experience something where you're like, that certain combination of rooms you've never seen before did something unique, and or the strategy elements of that particular strategy really led to a unique, compelling session that's unlike any other day that you've had in the game.
There's already so much in my head from this discussion that, like, I'll just leave that up to the like, I'll just say there's more that we don't even have time to talk about, right? There's resources that you maintain throughout the day. There's special items you can get that allow you to do even more special things. And then just now we're getting to the puzzle element, right? Which we haven't even talked about for the majority of the deep dive into the game, but remain like a pretty crucial element of the experience. How did you manage grafting puzzle solving onto this kind of board game experience? Like how did you work with those seemingly tangential kind of experiences?
I think if you picture this game as a tile laying board game, which is where it started out in its conception, was sort of like it was always going to be, I would say, a game, a drafting sort of tile based game where you're presented with a number of tiles. You're able to choose one and sort of create the house like that. There was always going to be obstacles, even when it was designed as a board game in the very genesis of this idea. There were always going to be obstacles, and then the player having to figure out how to bypass those obstacles, which is, inherently a puzzle, because we're not telling you necessarily how you have to find this. This might be as simple in the beginning as finding a locked door. I think that the majority of the quote puzzles in the game, they're not really necessarily even puzzles. They're just the player figuring out how the world works without us telling them anything. And so there's so many things in the game that they feel as rewarding and maybe even more rewarding than solving a puzzle. But they get to be entirely environmentally, sort of like logically proven elements of the house that through either trial and error or experimentation, the player slowly learns how these elements work by doing them. So I think that's the first type of puzzles. And there's so many different types of puzzles in the game. I'm probably covering most types of puzzles throughout the entire experience. But when you're first starting it, there's a lot of these sort of more superficial puzzles, which are just in a room, kind of like the parlor boxes that we were discussing. But then there's also these wide sort of governing sort of rules that govern this world and this house that that the player will slowly discover over time.
What was your approach to puzzle design? And I guess, like, what kind of puzzles do you like? What did you want this game to be full of?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I'm very picky in the types of puzzles I like and the type of puzzle games, which is funny that I have such a variety of different types of puzzles, given how little puzzles and puzzle games I like. But that's just because I'm very particular, and I blame it on being spoiled really early on. My favorite puzzle game of all time is Riven. And I almost don't even like the word, you like to use the word puzzle in this case, because to me it's about this grounded thing in this world. And this is the reason why, out of all the Myst and Riven and all the subsequent first-person atmospheric puzzle games that came out in the late 90s, early aughties, it's why none of them ever really worked as well, because they would all have these sort of puzzles that would be these standalone things, usually would break out of the UI and involve you doing, a very puzzle boxy type puzzle, but wasn't connected at all with anything else in the world. And I think if you look at Riven, and I don't do this nearly as well as Riven does, where every single element in that game is it has a logical reason for existing. You can actually figure out how it works just by figuring out its purpose in that world. And because of that, you're able to solve it without even finding all the necessarily clues or informations that you would need it. So I think that game and that experience when I played it as a kid informed all my taste, and it started me on a journey looking for a game like that again. And so I feel like that was the benchmark. That's my favorite type. That's not the only type of puzzle in the game. I have some that are more crudely executed puzzles. But certainly when I'm looking for a game, that's the type of environmentally grounded puzzles that make sense in a universe and tell a story at the same time. I mean, the benchmark is so high, and it is almost unobtainable, but like we try.
Some of the material in reminds me a lot of Riven. If you just observed and let it sit with your thoughts and took a shower and slept on it, you might, And
I think that's the beauty of that type of game, is because if it makes sense, you can actually solve it without being at the game. Because you can just think about how this works, and you can just, logically kind of come up with ideas. And even if you don't solve it, you'll come up with ideas that you can try the next time you play. And I think that is something that Blueprints shares in the core of its DNA, is allowing for players to come up with their own ideas and trying them. And a lot of these ideas you're going to get away from the game. And by having a sort of grounded basis, that allows players to do it, as opposed to, let's say, like an elaborate sliding box type puzzle that pops up on the screen. You're obviously not going to be able to memorize enough of that to solve it off screen. So I'm much more a fan of the former than the latter.
Yeah, there are definitely moments in Blueprints where I would find some of these simpler puzzles and say, yeah, I'll do this later. And come back. But the beauty is that you do feel like you have the agency to progress your experience without tackling every single thing that is presented to you.
I am a bit guilty of hiding the game's hand from the player at the onset. And I do like that when you play and you find some of these early puzzle rooms, that it presents a much more compartmentalized, simple version of a puzzle, which kind of like sets players' expectations of what the game's trying to do pretty low on that front, maybe even like nefariously so, because I've heard some players be like, I expected there to be a lot more puzzles in this game.
And you're like,
which
exactly.
I get joy out of that, but like, it's not it's not necessarily the greatest for marketing the game. But I think at this point we're fully on word of mouth, kind of carrying us over that threshold in reaching the sort of puzzle lovers that might have written us off if you've only played like 20 minutes.
I think there's something to call out there, though, that even for the simpler stuff, there is a very strong feeling of a risk reward, even at a very micro level. Maybe the parlor seems easy, but I could still fail it, right? Like there's never that certainty.
And that's kind of why like bumpy design is really important. Like we're like, if you tried to balance everything, and we spent obviously 4 years balancing, and a lot of people think balancing means every single room needs to be the exact same power level so that you're always given an interesting choice of 3 rooms. And that logically makes sense as a designer, right? You're like, okay, that's cool because I want all 3 of those options to always be, the exact same level of benefits. But the problem is then you don't really have a strategy, because it doesn't matter what they pick because they're all the same power level. So you do want bumpy design where some of these rooms are going to be worse. And the cool thing about puzzles is that the benefit of a puzzle-based room where you have to solve a puzzle in order to progress or to get resources, that benefit will shift depending on who the player is. And there's going to be some players that really hate that. There's going to be players that hate puzzles, and I kind of designed the game in a way that will still work for them, which is crazy, to create a puzzle game that can be enjoyed by people who don't like to do puzzles, because all the puzzles in the game, you can figure out other ways around it, and so in that way, like everything has alternate solutions and alternate ways to bypass it. Now, maybe you could consider it's kind of a puzzle figuring out how to bypass the puzzles. And that's probably accurate, but that's a different access that I think that people will enjoy. People like figuring out ways to sort of get around a game's intention,
Yeah, and I can confirm, as long as I'm allowed to say this, that in our recent little near launch playtest with a couple newcomers, all 3 of us hit sort of the first mission objective in completely different ways. So it's there's definitely a lot of variety in the ways to tackle kind of the same progression. I would be remiss if I did not disclose that in that previous example I gave of staring at a wall and trying to figure out a puzzle or giving up, that sometimes those rooms, I'm fairly certain, had no puzzle at all in them. Okay. And I'm not going to out myself as to what rooms those were, but is that something you revel in, that there's not even a clear distinction sometimes what you should really be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think this is my taste, and ultimately I will be always very candid that I made blueprints directly for my own taste and directly for me. This is the game I always wanted to play. This is the puzzle game I always wanted to play. I think that a lot of people are really surprised coming from modern game design that the items don't highlight, for example. But this is something I like because I don't like the game telling me, here are the important things. You can ignore all the set dressing. I like it where it's not clear what's set dressing or not. And in this game, just because you can't click on something does not mean it's not important. And just because something doesn't highlight doesn't mean it's not important. In fact, nothing highlights. So therefore, everything kind of gets to be on the play, which is a lot more realistic and it's a lot more challenging. Because obviously, if you have to consider everything could potentially matter, suddenly the elements that you have to juggle in your own mind could quickly grow out of control. So I think this was the main challenge of the game. And I think that when people think the rooms are very simplistic, that's by design. I think like in an earlier version of the game, all the drawers could open. And it was over time that we realized in order for this to work, we really have to drip feed the ideas and the complications of the game in a very organic way so as not to ever sort of like overwhelm the players. You're always dealing with, maybe until deeper into the game, you're always dealing with enough that you can still maintain sort of ownership over your own ideas and theories without having to consider so much. So you'll be in a room and you'll be considering this, but the real truth is players quickly realize you just need to move on. Like if you're like, I can't figure this out, I'm very suspicious of this thing, I'm going to look around this room, see if I can figure this out. Very likely, you're not going to be able to figure out in that one room. This is not like an escape room. You're going to find something that you're not going to understand what it means until 100 rooms later. And for someone else, those rooms might have been back to back. So the dynamic of the experience changes both in when you find stuff, but also in the proximity you find it to where it might be useful. And it's sort of, that's the joy of the game, is it's allowing the player to draw those, connect those dots. And the critical reason this works is because the player doesn't need to make that connection to progress. They can miss it, and we're okay with them missing it. And it's critical that we allow them to miss it, because by allowing them to miss it, the whole system works. The game is designed so that you are always able to continue exploring, and in doing so, you will make new discoveries, and those discoveries will oftentimes crack sort of the problems that you were working on earlier in the game.
Right. But let's be clear. When you said this is not an escape room, I will say, except when it is. And
remember, always is never is
right.
Is not an applicable word with the game. So
yeah, and keep a notebook handy. We haven't touched on that yet, but this is definitely the kind of game that if you enjoy taking notes and referencing those notes later and reflecting on those notes when you're not playing the game, this is a game for you. And if you are the type of player that likes a journal, I will say that there's enough in the game to justify a journal. I think a lot of times, like when I'm playing a game and I need to take some notes, I'll start with a scrap of paper, right?
and then that scrap of paper will become 2 scraps of paper and 3 scraps of paper. That's totally valid, obviously. But at some point, I'm like, man, I wish I actually had started a journal. Like I'm obviously I have a bookshelf full of my Myst journals, and the practice kind of grew on me so much that most other games in that genre that I approached, I would also have a journal, whether it was necessary or not, just because that was a way I really enjoyed playing. So you are welcome to take notes in whatever way you want. You're welcome to not take notes. You can take screenshots. We're pretty explicit, pretty upfront. There's a note that a player might find that pretty much suggests getting a journal.
That's the
yes,
I think. Yeah. Okay. Cool. The game is beautiful. The whole experience feels great. It has a very specific kind of cold mood that encourages the comfort, I guess, while you're exploring. A really distinct visual style. How would you describe the look of the game? I tried to come up with a short description. I thought maybe you could do it better.
I like that you just said what is welcoming and cold at the same time, and the word is blue, because blue is a cool color, but it's also it's very familiar. I think blue is the word I'm going to pick, and I just thought of that based on you saying cold, because the game is both cold. It has that sort of atmosphere that you could describe as like a blue fog, that the morning, like the blue hour of the morning, where you might have sort of like the fog. It's kind of halfway between night, but it's not scary. It's almost more tranquil in a way. And I think that's how I describe the atmosphere of the game, is that it's kind of bordering on that sort of dawn and that tranquil between slightly unsettling, but only in that you're alone. That's the first thing that struck me playing Myst as a kid was how unsettling it is to be alone here. And it's not scary with a capital S, but it is unnerving at times.
The soundtrack, I do not like bringing up Breath of the Wild because I know that a million other games have taken this approach, but the music kind of comes in as I'm sure a system that's trying to kind of figure out where you're at and what you might be doing. It hits at the right moments and is kind of not there otherwise. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the approach to the soundtrack and what role that plays? And
yeah, it's super difficult when your game is completely nonlinear, and not only nonlinear, but your spaces are also not predictable. I think from the onset, I knew I wanted it to be atmospheric, and for me, atmospheric means you're not always hearing a track. Sometimes you're hearing, the ambience of a room, the hum of a light. To me, kind of being in a space is kind of getting a sense of it, both the ambience and that specific room sort of signature tone. And so I like to use music pretty sparse, but the soundtrack is quite sizable because of how much there is to discover in the game. And a lot of the musics will come in for certain rooms or certain things that a player might discover, and it's kind of aimed to elevate those moments even more. And I think that because the music isn't ever present, it makes those moments even more powerful because we've kind of withheld that sort of element.
I assume you did not write the music yourself. How did you go about finding a musician or a group for that?
And I definitely always want to give my team credit because it's only mostly a solo effort because of the amount of time the project took. And I just happened to be the one working on it every year, where most other people came and went as they sort of did their things. But the incredible work that the art director has done, and that now the composer and the soundtrack was done by Trig and Gousset, and they're sort of dark doom jazz group that kind of play with soundscapes and really atmospheric tones. And I remember the very first time I heard one of their tracks, and it just happened to be, something that was randomly playing, I think on Spotify. And I was just like, I've never heard something that sounds like this before, but this is Mount Holly. And I was dead sure they were my first choice. I approached them, and they were interested, and after a lot of talking we realized like we saw eye to eye. And funny enough, like the soundtrack that they created for the game is kind of unlike a lot of their other work. Like it's almost unique. They found something that was even unique unto itself, but it has a lot of their signature heart and soul, and I know that they poured everything into it, and I just couldn't be happier. That's probably there's a lot of elements of the game that I'm very happy with, but that is one element of the game which surpassed all of my expectations on how it was going to come out, and yeah, and I just love it to death.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of the beginning of the project, and I'm actually maybe way before the project. Growing up, I know you've talked about Myst and Riven and kind of some of those formative experiences. What other gaming related or story, puzzle, like anything that might inform this game, what was of interest to you growing up?
Probably the biggest thing that I can think of that directly informed this game, and of course, I don't think your question it necessarily pertains to stuff that has to inform this game, but I think that there is a illustrated book called Maze, which I had found probably when I was like 10 or 11, and I remember it was in a Target on the end cap. It starts you off in a room, and there's 4 doors, and you get to choose which door to walk through. And as the doors each have a number above them, and that's the page number you turn to. And so let's say you choose this cool looking door with a 4 above it, and then on that you turn to page 4, and you're in a new room. And so you're kind of exploring a house. And in fact, when the book begins, it says, "This is not a book. This is a building in the form of a book." When I had seen this was before I had ever played, a sort of point and click first person game. This was probably right before Myst came out. And so this was kind of like, in a lot of, the book came out in 1984, and I really do believe it was kind of one of the forerunners, if not like sort of the impetus of the first person point and click adventure games, because you are sort of going through this house in a sort of first person perspective and choosing rooms and kind of exploring it. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like an illustrated game book, like, kind of those Dungeons and Dragons game books or Steve Jackson's Sorcery. So it's kind of like that, but in an illustrated form. So it's a very visual way to go through that. And that book had a profound effect on me. It's my favorite piece of art that's ever been created. And so that book is usually what I cite as most everything else that we've talked about is passive influences, kind of like there's no direct references or anything to any games in there. But Maze does have a core DNA in the way I look at the world, in the way I view architecture, in the way I view adventure. And so I think that Blueprints is dedicated to Christopher Manson, who is the author of Maze. And, without giving too much away, I will say that he did work on a small part of the game. And so I feel like that this Mount Holly is definitely cut from the cloth that he created from Myst.
So there's a lot I want to get into about development later when we meet back up a year or two from now or whatever, because it's going to cross a lot of puzzle design and spoilers and stuff and when things came into view. But my understanding is that your background was in filmmaking, not game development. Like how, I mean, this is your first game, right? How did you switch gears like that? Why did you do this?
I switched gears because of the idea. I think like I'm always kind of coming up with sort of some form of creative projects to kind of express something or to create something. And I've created a lot of like board games. Film had become a profession for me. So it started out as a hobby, but I had kind of moved to Hollywood and was kind of working in the film industry. That basically segued into the commercial field where, you know, I was doing commercial work. That was not super creatively fulfilling. So I think that because I was doing that and getting paid for that, that I was looking for other ways to kind of play around with and express. And I think a lot of that was board game design. And so I found a lot of joy in sort of creating board game design and trying to come up with systems and mechanics and play around in that. And so I feel like that was a gradually thing. I wish I remembered the logic before deciding to start, but I definitely remember the moment I decided to start. And I think we'll save that for when we get further into it. But we'll say that there was a critical moment that kind of flipped everything for me.
When this became a video game, was that because of you kind of outpaced the limitations of a physical game?
No, because it was never fleshed out as a board game. Like I've come up with a lot of board game concepts, but blueprints in the board game sense, and it wasn't even blueprints then. It was called Bequest. But it was much more of a collection of ideas centered around drafting rooms, architecturally and mechanically. And so it was much more of like, I think like maybe 1.5 pages of my ideas notebook. That was just a few room ideas and how this game might work on a grid. And that was basically it. And it was not until I started getting into learning Unity that bringing that idea into another project I was working on, which was about exploring a house, totally static, non-moving house, you know, very, very Euclidean. So I think that the day that I decided to bring that board game idea into the house was kind of like the day that Blueprints was actually born.
Got it. Okay. So we're talking about 8 years, but what I've heard, I think, from a lot of indie developers is they either slow burned an idea while they were working full time, or they were had a very concerted idea, went after it, and then didn't realize how much they'd bitten off and expected it to be done very quickly. What were like the first 6 months, year like of this project?
So I had the first build done in 3 months, maybe, the first build of the entire game. And this was due in part to how easy it is in Unity to create a first-person game. You just download a first-person controller. You can just create a geometric plane. He goes on there, maybe create some cubes, and now you're exploring some cubes. So when I realized how easy that was, I was like, boom, I can make a house with cubes. So I make 2 walls. There's a doorway. It's just the absence of a wall. And then I'm just creating cubes and I don't know any 3D modeling. So I'm just putting cubes in the scene, creating a room. And then when I have a room, now I can copy paste that room. Within one day, I was like just going to town, like throwing like board patterns on this. Now, of course, I wasn't creating any of the assets. So, these were stock images, maybe downloaded from a stock image site for the textures. And then everything else was just cubes, just primitive cubes, and just trying to create objects. Like a chair would be like, 4 cubes and that. And so, so I was just creating this sort of house. And then at some point I was like, well, if this is this easy in one day, then I'm going to do a game. like that. There's just no question. Like, this is way easier than it should be. Obviously, I think that this is in 2016, so the idea of creating a game without needing to sort of create an engine is a new concept, at least to me. And that was kind of the entire reason I was exploring this was to check out Unity and to check out how difficult it is with the current tools to make a game, because I had no idea. I think making a game always seemed like a very technically challenging mountain, and I feel like a lot of people still think that, and it's just not the case. It's just like a lot of the creative fields is the tools have just brought the accessibility of this art form to such a manageable level. To loop this back to your question, when I started, I thought, since I created the first build of the game in 3 months, and that was with all art assets, I had sort of upgraded from placing cubes to when I discovered Unity's asset store and I could just buy assets at will, then I was totally off to the races. And so that was the first build that was done within 3 months, and then refined maybe over 6 months. That was made entirely with store-bought assets and stock textures, stock images. And so that was the one that we play tested. Then when I saw how well the concept worked, that was when I brought in my art director and we scrapped everything. Through everything, nuked everything in the project down to 0, including code, all assets, and we decided to make everything from scratch by hand, painstakingly, and that process took 2 years. So that moved us from year 1 to year 3, and then from that point onward, I thought the game was 1 year away from completion until now. Like, where now I think the game is complete. So, like, I no longer think it's 1 year away. I would say a week away, but the game is complete now, and it's been complete for a bit.
So in year 3, you thought you had a year left, and it actually took 5 or so. What changed? I mean, what did you not anticipate?
It's like fractions, where it's like, I feel like I'm 4/5 of the way done. There's 1/5 left. When I get to that point, when I do what should have been the 1/5, I'm still at 4/5. It wasn't that I kept adding more, and that the game was longer as a consequence. It was just that the game was taking longer, and I kept adding more because I had more time. I feel like, at least the way I measure time is usually contextually. So suddenly, I've already spent 4 years, so spending 3 months on the grass isn't a lot of time in the context of how long this project has already gone on. So a lot of those decisions start to become contextually based on how long this goes. The second reason is I like to do the ideas I'm excited about, and I don't really care about the consequences or the logistics. So if an idea is really good and I'm like, ooh, this would be amazing if I could pull this off, then I'm going to try to pull it off. And some of those ideas have cost me years of time. And it's very hard to gauge some of the repercussions and the ripple effects of some of these ideas. Like, you might come up with a good idea and it's going to cost you 3 days of work. And it's very hard to tell the difference between that idea and the idea that cost me 2 years. But I do them both, and I don't regret either.
I assume you were at this full time for the majority of that 8 years. How did you get by? Do you have a side hustle that we don't know about? What's Tonda up to?
So, yeah, the majority of the 7 of the 8 years were full time. The first 3 months when I did the build was full time. So the year after that first 3 months, that was the year where it's like, okay, I've done this. I kind of know I kind of know I want to get into this. But I was still working on it part-time while I was sort of handling sort of the commercial design that I was doing on the side. And so that year was like, as our production company, that was our most profitable year ever because I was trying to get as much work from clients as I possibly could to kind of build up a nest egg that could support the project as long as it could. But that did not last super long. Obviously, we closed up shop in 2017, and that's when I fully dedicated myself to the project. So I don't think that was not going to last very long. Like maybe that lasted a couple years. So the rest of the time was supported through ad revenue of a website that I own called mythicspoiler.com, which is kind of like a preview card gallery way to show off cards for Magic the Gathering that I had created many years earlier, maybe in 2012, 2013. And just the ad revenue from that was, enough to, keep the ramen supplied, but I sold my car and I sleep on the floor. So like, it's, like we're getting through it.
Hi, Tonda. Andrew here, and I have a question for you about design process. There are so many threads that the player can pull on in blueprints, and they can do it in many, many different orders. And I want to know how you keep that all straight. Do you have a diagramming technique for all of those dependencies? Do you use a particular type of software? Do you just keep it all in your head? I want to know what that looks like.
So for the first 3 years, there was a document. And I believe the document was... to call it a document's not even accurate. It was a Photoshop file. And it was a Photoshop file and I think it was like 8,000 pixels wide so that it could have enough depth to really go in and do this. And I think this was because this was before like Miro or I had seen any sort of like lossless, like sort of digital like pen board type systems. So there was a document and within it, I was keeping track of all the threads. That only lasted till about 3 years before the complexities of everything I was dealing with kind of became the weight of the complexities crushed any sort of way to sensibly discern what was going on and the way that everything was connected. It was already a very intense spider web at that time, and it was just not sustainable to be able to document that in any discernible way. So moving forward from that, it was entirely in my head, which is a lot more robust than a Photoshop file. But that did have a trade-off that I could not take a break. Because if I took any sizable break from the game, that the fidelity of that mind's map of everything would break down. So this did have a huge consequence in that I was not able to take a break. I'm not necessarily the type of person that would need to take a break anyway. But from that point on, I pretty much had to keep everything in my mind at all times. So it involved constantly thinking about it, basically, in order to keep everything in focus.
All right, we're skipping over a lot, and I want to save a lot of the deeper discussion for later. But at some point, I think last year, you released a demo, which was not dissimilar in a lot of ways from what I had played in 2022. Um, that must have been a big step for the project. How did you feel about that? Walk me through sort of just thinking on that and how that made you feel, like putting it out into the world.
Yeah, the demo was it was incredibly difficult to create a demo for this game. I mean, I feel like if anyone plays the game, you'll understand the problems in creating a demo, and there's really no way to segment off material because there's a minimum amount of rooms that the game needs to be able to operate, and it's a lot of rooms. I always knew that this demo was not going to be able to be restricted content-wise. The only restriction was going to be time-wise, and we had two choices. A timer to physically time. There are some time demos, or to restrict the number of days. I did not like the timer idea because Blueprints is never about pressure. It's never about rushing. In fact, the just as a general tip, the slower you take playing the game, the better you'll do because you'll be more observant. You won't miss stuff. For a demo, I wanted to give players enough freedom so that they did not feel time pressure, especially because that's not indicative of the game at all. The days, however, does kind of show players the concept that the day resets and so the day counts sound good. I was thrilled to see how much everyone loved the demo. I think like it became way more popular than I had expected, and I thought people had, on average, people liked it a lot more than I was expecting them to like it. And that I always knew we were going to be very popular with strategy-based players and sort of puzzle enthusiasts. And I knew that people that like both puzzles and sort of like board games were going to really love it. But I didn't know like how alienating it would be for people who dislike the other one. And I think I was thrilled to learn that we were pretty much covering the full Venn diagram of both of these types of players. You know, I've had a lot of people just saying like, "Oh, I just fell in love with the demo, and I don't like puzzle games." And on the reverse too, of like, I normally hate roguelike games, but like I'm having a blast here. And so basically, we're the entire Venn diagram, and then we're beyond, where somehow the combination of these two elements is getting people who don't even have experience in either of those two things. So yeah, it's been wildly popular and wildly satisfying to see the reaction that everyone's had to it thus far.
Did that reaction influence Final Days, or do you feel like the game that we're going to play is exactly the same?
The game was done. The game was pretty much done before the demo came out. So you know, we did have to take things out of the demo, take things out of the game to kind of prevent progression and to kind of narrow down the experience. So there's still like a lot of things in rooms and things that are going to surprise players and things that have changed. But at its core, the game was done long before the demo came out.
All right. Well, to kind of wrap things up, it's been 8 years. How has your life changed over those 8 years? Are you doing okay? Are you excited for this to be out in the wild and to open the next chapter?
I think I'm excited to start on the next project. I've been working on this a long enough time to get a lot of other ideas that I've had to, you know, exercise a large amount of willpower to not sort of like jump ship to the new shiny thing. I think that's the hardest thing of a project this long is it's taken a lot to not follow those threads and to stick with the project. So I think I'm very excited to sort of get the game into players' hands and to see how their playthroughs go. One of the most fun things is how unique each playthrough is, which means like I've personally watched 100 full playthroughs of this game, and it just never gets old. And I've now gotten enough data to know that's not just because I'm the creator. I've had enough people watching playthroughs on our team that are kind of like, oh, I'm really into this playthrough, and watching people play the demo on Twitch and things have kind of like been similarly compelling. So I think I'm really looking forward to checking out some people playing it, and I'm equally excited to start the next project as soon as we fix all the bugs that I'm sure people will eventually find. It's feeling like it's in a really good place right now, but in a game this deep, there's gonna be some bugs found. So we'll be fixing all those up before hopefully I jump ship. But I'm looking to jump ship sooner than later.
Well, I can't wait to play it in its final form. I can't wait to share it with the world. I can't wait to see other people play it. But you couldn't get away from this interview without a lightning round. So we're gonna jump into zip mode, and I have exactly 46 questions for you.
I got my clicker. I'll go zip, 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 zip. I've seen how the Myst speedrunners go.
All right. What is your favorite color?
Blue.
Good. You passed the first test. How would you describe Blueprints in one word?
Bequest.
Why should Myst fans play Blueprints?
Deep lore.
How long did it take you to beat Riven?
1 year.
On day one, what are you drafting and from which direction?
I'm drafting a closet straight up the middle.
How much research did you do into actual blueprints?
The bare minimum required.
What is your favorite board game?
For complex systems, Gloomhaven. For simplicity, Love Letter.
Did it give you some kind of sick pleasure to see me run out of steps in the antechamber?
No.
In one word, and without spoilers, what was your favorite puzzle to design?
44.
Which puzzle got the most revisions?
Parlor.
Are the billiard room puzzles auto-generated, or did you handpick every single one of them?
Handpicked every single one.
What is your favorite Prince of all time?
Blueprints.
What is your favorite Prince song?
Is Computer Blue, I believe, is a Prince song.
What does it sound like when doves cry?
Probably silence.
What scares you the most about releasing the game?
Having to socially engage more.
Will there be any additional content added to the game?
Can't say.
Are there any puzzles that need information outside of the game to solve?
No.
Are you afraid this game might dog you bomb?
No answer.
How long did it take you to solve the entire
38 days.
What are you bequeathing in your last will and testament?
Probably the rights to Blueprints.
That's very meta. Is Blueprints going to be a launch game for the Switch too?
I don't have anything to say about that this time.
How do you unlock the Blue Princess?
There's no Blue Princess.
Have you ever had your fingerprints taken?
I think I did as a kid.
Did they ever give them back?
No, I don't think so.
Because fingerprints... You know what? Let's move on. What is in the lavatory?
A mirror.
Are you not denying the fact that there is a...
Can't use that. Deny.
What is your favorite blue crayon?
Cerulean? How do you spell that? Cerulean.
You can only pick one. Crystallis or Zelda 1?
Zelda 1.
Wrong answer.
Right answer. And Crystallis was my favorite NES game growing up.
How much do you regret naming your game something that you just cannot Google?
If people can't figure out what the game's called, then they failed the first puzzle.
Why is the player character young?
Title might have something to do with it.
Is Blueprints a spiritual successor to Blue's Clues?
I don't think so.
Can you confirm for me right now that you will 100% make a Swimbird plush?
Someone will.
Is it true there are only 12?
Absolutely cannot answer that.
What is your favorite UFO 50 game?
Oh, I'm only halfway through. Golfaria.
Do you mind if I take a blue rinse real quick?
Sure.
What is the scariest bug that you fixed?
Opening a door and there being no room.
How diverse were the primary playtesters' playthroughs?
Very diverse.
What is your favorite blue food?
Is blue Skittles. No, it's in a yellow bag. It's blue Skittles in a yellow bag. That's my answer.
I know you've already answered this, but I'm just asking explicitly.
Tropical Skittles. The blue Skittles and tropical Skittles.
There's a special thanks in the credits to Andrew Schuldeis. Who introduced you to him? Yeah, that's right. I just want to get that on the record. How big was the offer that you turned down from DraftKings?
They never made an offer.
Can you please help me come up with a magic joke here? I want to reference your enjoyment of the game, but I don't play it.
I don't enjoy the game.
Approximately what percentage of the game did you refuse to talk about today?
95%.
How are you feeling?
Kind of ill. Honestly. Not great.
Would you like some water?
Mm-hmm. No.
If the average player time of Blueprints is over 30 hours, would this surprise you?
To set player expectations, I'll say yes.
Does it matter to you how much people end up enjoying this game?
As long as one person really loves it, then that's all I care about.
It sounds like you are ready for this game to be out. What is the ideal experience that you want and expect somebody to have with Blueprints?
Ideally, and of course, that's that word's carrying a lot of weight here because I'm a firm believer that players are free to experience it in whatever way they see fit. But ideally, I would play in a dimly lit room with some loud audio or headphones. Just try to make it an immersive experience, and then with a light for taking notes.
So barring some kind of catastrophe, Blueprints is done and will launch here in a few weeks. What advice would you give to somebody who is still in the middle of that journey, who is hoping one day to reach this finish line?
If you're making a game and you're kind of in the middle there, don't put out your demo too early. Don't waste your Steam Next Fest because you only have one of those. And start submitting to publishers sooner than later, even if you think if you're scared that it's not good enough yet. It's always better to be early in establishing a relationship with the publisher.
So with folks like Shuhei Yoshida and Jason Schreier already singing the praises of this game in the weeks before launch, are you more excited or nervous for launch day?
Oh, I'm super excited. Yeah. Not nervous, excited.
Well, to bring things to a close, my final question is, can you please tell me your life cereal story?
So when I was a kid, Life Cereal was giving away an Animaniacs stopwatch. And I wanted it a lot. I didn't like Life, but I convinced my mom to buy as many boxes of Life Cereal that you needed to submit the barcodes. The Animaniacs stopwatch needed 4 proofs of purchase, which means I had to get 4 boxes of Life, which was a tall order, and I had to convince my mom that I was swearing yes, I'll eat it. She was like, no, you're not going to eat this Life Cereal. I know how much you don't like Life. I'm like, yeah, but I need this Animaniacs watch. So I convinced her, and she bought 4 boxes of Life Cereal. And I can almost remember every single bowl I ate, which was just I remember I got 2 cinnamon Life and 2 normal Life just to get a little variety. But I didn't like Life for whatever reason. Kind of fought my way through the bowls and sent in my proofs of purchase. And I never got the stopwatch. The stopwatch never came. 20 years later, a friend was gifting random boxes of cereals to people at an event. And I happened to get Life, which I thought was like, that was a cool coincidence. I was like, okay, at least I got a history with Life, you know. At this point, probably I have adult taste, so Life's not going to be too bad. So I was looking forward to trying it when I finally opened it up, which was like a couple days later, maybe 4 or 5. Inside that box was an Animaniacs watch that friend had found a authentic one off eBay, bought a box of Life cereal, had opened it up, had snuck in the prize, had used a vacuum resealer to reseal the cereal, and then glue back the box so that I wouldn't notice, and then come up with an elaborate way of giving random boxes so I wouldn't suspect anything either. So and that friend is the producer of Blueprints, and the other half of Doggy Bomb, Axel Haviko.
Well, Tonda, thank you so much for joining me today. Blueprints is out April 10th, 2025 on PC, Xbox Series S or Series X, PlayStation 5, and if you have Xbox Game Pass, PC Game Pass, or PlayStation Plus, the game is included in those services on launch day. I do hope that we get the opportunity to meet up in a year or two to dive deep into this game. Good luck on what I only can assume is a media blitz to come in the next 2 weeks. Thank you so much, and good luck on the next couple of months of bug fixing. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thanks for the fun time.